Good morning. A reservist is now out of the Canadian Armed Forces over his alleged links to white supremacists. That is a fresh development this morning in a story that has been moving quickly since we first told you about it last week. The soldier, who allegedly acted as a recruiter for what experts call a neo-Nazi terrorist group, is now fired. Michael Serapio is going to lead off our coverage of the story for this hour. Military brass on this. Michael, what are they saying?
Well, we are told by National Defence that Master Corporal Patrick Matthews has been relieved of duty, Heather. He'll no longer be allowed to participate in any military activities. He has reportedly surrendered his uniforms, and he will not be returning to work as a reservist. Take a look at the statement provided to the CBC by DND. They say it's incumbent of our leaders to know their soldiers and to take measures when they have acted in a manner that is not aligned with our beliefs and culture of respect for all people. We have taken decisive action, and we will continue to exert full energy in removing those from our ranks who harbor extremist ideologies. Now, Matthews allegedly belongs to a hate group known as the Base that is associated with a U.S. hate group that purports to prepare its members for what it calls an oncoming race war. And according to experts in extremism, they prefer members to receive military training so that they can share that knowledge with other members. Now, Matthews was an 8-year member of the 38th Canadian Brigade Group in Winnipeg. Police raided his home outside of Winnipeg and Beausejour last week. A number of weapons were seized, but Matthews has neither been charged nor convicted of any specific crime. Still, he has been relieved of duty again. That statement provided to the CBC from National Defence, Heather. Okay, Michael, thank you very much. Starting things there in studio, the reason that we know about this story in the first place is because of the work of one journalist, and I could add it's because of his daring and courage, too. He's a reporter with the Winnipeg Free Press, Ryan Thorpe, and he went undercover to infiltrate the dangerous neo-Nazi group to get his story. Ryan is with me this morning from Winnipeg because we want to talk further about these latest developments. Ryan Thorpe, good morning to you and welcome to our program.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
I was just with Michael talking about the big headline for this morning that Master Corporal Patrick Matthews, who, as your article this morning says, was to have returned to duty next month, will no longer because he's been relieved of his duties. What else have you learned about the firing and the circumstances surrounding that, Ryan?
So I haven't learned a ton. The military has been relatively tight-lipped in terms of letting us in on what their process has been. But early yesterday morning, I did learn that, he'd been stripped of his uniforms, that he was being barred from further military activity, and that he would be formally released from his duties in the Canadian Armed Forces in the coming weeks.
And at this point, if they're not telling you much about the process, understandably, do you have any indication whether he's cooperating with them, giving any details as they investigate?
No, in terms of Master Corporal Patrick Matthews, whenever we have reached out for comment, he has declined comment, and then obviously the Canadian military itself isn't revealing too much in terms of what its investigation has looked like so far.
Okay. But we know from your reporting what the allegations are. Going undercover, you revealed the alleged ties as a recruiter for the base. Tell us more about, we know what you initially reported, but have you learned anything further about what specifically he was doing? He was a combat engineer, he had firearms training. Any more about his specific activities, Ryan?
Not only had firearms training, but as a combat engineer, he had explosives training as well. And in terms of his activities in the base, what I learned through my reporting was that he had previously said that he had been crossing the U.S. border to go participate in paramilitary training down in the Pacific Northwest region with some of his U.S. comrades, and that here in Canada, he was really looking to ramp up paramilitary training here, and in particular, that's what he was recruiting me for in an effort to get these paramilitary training events known as hate camps off the ground here in Manitoba.
And with the goal, once having those on the ground in Manitoba, then what was the aim from there?
I mean, the ultimate goal was to prepare for a race war. This is very explicit with this group. They think a race war is on the horizon, and they really want to help foment it. They believe in a theory called accelerationism, which is the notion that these neo-Nazis should do what they can to try and make this race war happen sooner and to carry out attacks that help destabilize the system.
What was surprising for many, although some would say shouldn't have been surprising, was that this was going on within the context of the Canadian Forces, and as your undercover reporting revealed, likely not an isolated individual, Master Corporal Patrick Matthews. What have you learned there and since, Ryan, in terms of just how pervasive this is, to what extent far-right extremism, neo-Nazism, white supremacist thinking is a factor within the Canadian Forces?
So in November 2018, the military released an internal report into this very issue. Over about a 4-year period, they had identified 53 individuals who had either been direct members in a hate group or who had undergone some process of radicalization. Now, I think the thing to point out is a lot of people have said, 53, that's a relatively small number in the context of the Canadian military. Of course, this is true. It doesn't reflect on the vast majority of members, but the 53 is certainly too many. One is too many, and it's also the only ones that we know about. At the same time the military was preparing this report, Master Corporal Patrick Matthews was flying under the radar. We don't know the full scope of this problem, but it certainly is a problem, and we know that these groups are actively pushing their members to join the military or seeking folks who already have military experience or backgrounds in chemistry and engineering.
You mentioned Patrick Matthews flying under the radar. There was some confusion, really, from military leadership in terms of just how aware they were of his alleged activities.
Yeah, that's correct. So when the Canadian Armed Forces finally put someone up to speak about this issue for the first time in the aftermath of my reporting, that would have been last Tuesday, they put up the Colonel Gwen Bork, who is the commander for the 38 Brigade Group. She came out and said that, we're investigating, but she wouldn't say exactly when they had begun investigating. And she also said that, Matthews last worked for the reserves in May, and at that time, we had no idea that there was any issues with him. Well, 2 days later, General Vance came out and said that Matthews had made utterances that kind of brought him on our radar in April. So this guy, had been flagged to us, and we were taking a look at him. Obviously, there's a discrepancy there because 1 month after General Vance says that Matthews was flagged, General Bork says, we weren't aware of any issues. The military, after I pointed this out, the military subsequently clarified that General Bork wasn't aware of the facts of the matter when, she first made her comments on this.
What's your sense, as I conclude this conversation, Ryan? Yes, there is some confusion there, but the Patrick Matthews story has obviously forced the military to address this case specifically and the bigger issue. What do you think now about how military leadership is responding to this?
Well, the federal defense minister recently commissioned a report into this very issue, and that report is supposed to try and get a better sense of just how widespread this issue is, and then also develop some recommendations. I've spoken to a number of trackers of far-right extremism. There seems to be a bit of hope that perhaps the military will transition to a more proactive approach towards weeding these people out in the future.
Ryan, thank you. Thank you for the time this morning. Thank you for all the great work you have done on this important story. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Ryan Thorpe, the journalist who broke this story, he works for the Winnipeg Free Press.